Japanese folklore is a labyrinth of shadowy corners and whispered secrets, where creatures born from humanity's deepest fears take shape in the darkness. These are the yokai, supernatural apparitions that give form to the anxieties, guilt, and moral struggles of their era. They emerge from the collective unconscious of a society, reflecting everything from natural disasters to social taboos, from unexplained phenomena to the consequences of breaking cultural norms. Among these countless spirits and demons, one figure stands out as especially unsettling and enduringly fascinating. By day, she appears as nothing more than an ordinary woman, perhaps your neighbor hanging laundry in her garden, a servant quietly going about her duties, or even your own wife preparing dinner. But when darkness falls and the world slumbers, her true nature reveals itself in the most horrifying way imaginable. Her neck begins to stretch like taffy, extending to impossible lengths as her head roams free through the night while her body remains peacefully asleep. She's been called many things throughout the centuries: a symbol of sin and karmic retribution, a figure of profound tragedy caught between two worlds, a cautionary tale about the consequences of moral transgression. Yet somehow, through the alchemy of time and changing cultural perspectives, she's transformed into something entirely unexpected, an icon of modern pop culture, appearing in anime, manga, and video games as everything from a comedic character to a romantic lead. This is the story of the Rokurokubi, a creature whose journey from nightmare to beloved character reflects our own evolving relationship with the monsters that lurk in our collective imagination. Picture this scene, if you will. It's late in the Edo period, around 1750, and the mountain roads of rural Japan are treacherous places after dark. A weary merchant, his pack laden with goods from the capital, finds himself caught by nightfall in a remote village nestled deep in the valleys of what is now Shizuoka Prefecture. The autumn mist clings to the mountainsides like ghostly fingers, and the temperature is dropping fast. The locals, surprisingly, are more welcoming than he expected. In most isolated villages, strangers are met with suspicion, but here the villagers seem almost eager to help. They offer him warm sake, a hot meal of mountain vegetables and fresh fish, and a comfortable room at the local inn. There's just one thing that strikes him as odd. Every single person in the village, from the youngest child to the eldest grandmother, wears a thick scarf or high collar that completely conceals their neck. Even indoors by the warm hearth, they keep these coverings pulled tight. When he politely inquires about this curious fashion, the villagers exchange meaningful glances before explaining it away as protection against the mountain cold, or an old tradition to ward off evil spirits. The merchant, grateful for their hospitality and exhausted from his long journey, accepts their explanation without question. He should have trusted the prickle of unease crawling up his spine. Deep in the night, he's jolted awake by a sound that shouldn't exist, a quiet, rhythmic slithering, like silk being drawn across tatama mats. His heart hammering in his chest, he creeps to the paper screen that separates his room from the corridor and peers through a tiny tear in the rice paper. What he sees in the pale moonlight filtering through the building will haunt him for the rest of his life. Gliding through the shadows like enormous serpents are dozens of impossibly long, pale necks, each as thick as a man's arm and stretching endlessly into the darkness. The necks move with fluid, hypnotic grace, their heads, human heads with sleeping faces peaceful as death, weaving between the rafters and sliding under doors. Some peer through windows into neighboring homes. Others drift toward the kitchen where they begin to lick the oil from paper lanterns with long, pink tongues. With dawning horror, the merchant realizes the truth. The scarves weren't a quaint local custom or protection against the cold. They were a desperate attempt to hide the shameful secret that every soul in this mountain village carried. He had stumbled into a community of monsters, a place where the boundary between human and yokai had long since dissolved. What he witnessed that night was the nocturnal feeding of creatures known as Rokurokubi, and he was the only normal human for miles around. The creature from our tale represents one of Japan's most psychologically complex yokai, with its legend crystallizing during the Edo period, 1603 to 1867, an era when supernatural stories flourished alongside a rigid social order. The very name Rokurokubi carries within it the essence of the transformation. Rokuro refers to a potter's wheel, while kubi means neck, together painting a vivid picture of how the neck rotates and extends like clay being shaped on a spinning wheel. What makes the Rokurokubi particularly fascinating among yokai is the duality of its existence. During daylight hours, a a Rokurokubi is completely indistinguishable from any other person. She might be the devoted wife who prepares your meals, the diligent servant who tends your garden, or the quiet neighbor who nods politely when you pass on the street. Her humanity is complete and genuine. She experiences all the emotions, desires, and concerns of any ordinary woman. She worries about her family, takes pride in her work, and dreams of the future just like anyone else. But when night falls and sleep claims her conscious mind, the curse awakens with a life of its own. Her neck begins its impossible transformation, stretching and extending until her head can roam freely while her body remains motionless in bed. The sleeping head embarks on nocturnal adventures that range from the merely mischievous to the genuinely terrifying. In the gentler tales, the Rokurokubi's wandering head might simply startle late-night travelers, peek into windows to satisfy curiosity, or develop a peculiar habit of licking the oil from paper lanterns, a behavior that often leads to her discovery when households notice their lamps mysteriously going dark. These relatively benign activities suggest a creature driven more by restless energy than malicious intent. However, darker variations of the legend paint a more sinister picture. Some accounts describe Rokurokubi heads that actively hunt small animals, their human teeth tearing into mice and birds with savage efficiency. The most disturbing stories tell of heads that attack sleeping humans, drinking their blood or breath while they're helpless in slumber. These vampiric qualities link the Rokurokubi to broader themes of nocturnal predation found in folklore worldwide. But perhaps the most tragic aspect of the Rokurokubi legend lies in its origins. Unlike many yokai who are born as supernatural beings, the Rokurokubi was once entirely human. Her transformation represents a karmic punishment, but the nature of that punishment reveals much about the social anxieties of Edo period Japan. In many versions of the tale, a woman becomes a Rokurokubi because of her own transgressions, adultery, breaking Buddhist precepts, or committing acts of cruelty or greed. These stories serve as moral warnings about the consequences of straying from accepted behavior. However, in a reflection of the deeply patriarchal society of the time, many legends place the blame not on the woman herself, but on the men in her life. A woman might become a Rokurokubi because her husband committed murder, her father broke sacred vows, or her male relatives engaged in corrupt business practices. The men responsible for these sins often face no supernatural consequences, while the innocent women in their families are condemned to live with this horrifying duality. This gendered aspect of the curse transforms the Rokurokubi from a simple monster story into a complex commentary on how women bore the burden of male transgression in traditional Japanese society. Perhaps most heartbreakingly, many Rokurokubi are completely unaware of their condition. They might wake each morning with strange, vivid dreams of flying through the village or tasting lamp oil, dismissing these experiences as mere nightmares. They cannot understand why they keep losing jobs, why neighbors whisper and point when they pass, or why no one will look them directly in the eyes. The curse operates entirely outside their conscious control, making them victims of their own supernatural nature. The world of Japanese yokai is rarely straightforward, and the Rokurokubi exists within a complex taxonomy of neck-related supernatural beings. Most notably, she's often confused with her far more dangerous relative, the Nikekubi. While the distinction might seem minor to outsiders, it's crucial to understanding the full scope of these legends. Where a Rokurokubi's neck stretches like rubber, maintaining a physical connection between head and body, a Nikekubi's head detaches completely, becoming a flying predator that soars through the night sky on invisible wings. These disembodied heads are almost universally portrayed as violent, driven by an insatiable thirst for blood that marks them as Japan's equivalent to vampires. The Nikekubi's hunting patterns are methodical and terrifying. The flying head seeks out sleeping victims, often children or the elderly, and feeds on their life force through various means, drinking their blood, stealing their breath, or consuming their dreams. Unlike the sometimes benign Rokurokubi, the Nikekubi is a creature of pure predatory instinct. Folklore provides specific methods for dealing with Nikekubi encounters. If you were to discover the headless, sleeping body of such a creature, moving it even slightly would prove fatal. The head would be unable to reattach, and the being would perish with the dawn. This vulnerability suggests that beneath their supernatural power lies a fragile dependence on the connection between body and spirit. Some folklorists theorize that the stretching neck Rokurokubi might have evolved from artistic misinterpretations of Nikekubi depictions. Traditional Japanese art often showed spiritual connections as thin lines between separated elements. An artist drawing a nukekibi might include a faint line representing the soul's tether between head and body, which viewers could misinterpret as an actual physical neck stretched to incredible proportions. These supernatural beings served as powerful vehicles for moral instruction, embedded within stories that taught specific lessons about behavior and consequences. One of the most famous tales comes from Shizuoka Prefecture and illustrates the theme of karmic justice with devastating clarity. The story tells of a corrupt Buddhist monk who abandons his vows for worldly pleasures. He runs away with a young woman named Ayatsu, spending her dowry money on gambling and drink. When Ayatsu falls ill and becomes a financial burden, the monk's greed overcomes any remaining compassion. He murders her in cold blood and steals what little money she has left, using it to begin a new life in a distant province. Years pass, and the monk has successfully buried his crime in the past. He's staying at a mountain inn when he becomes enchanted by the innkeeper's beautiful daughter. She's young, innocent, and everything that the murdered Ayatsu once was. That night, as they lie together in the darkness, the monk believes he's finally found happiness. But as midnight approaches, he watches in growing horror as the girl's neck begins to stretch. Her face transforms, features shifting until he's staring into the eyes of the woman he murdered years ago. Ayatsu's voice emerges from the transformed head, accusing him of his crime with words that cut like knives. The monk's carefully constructed new life crumbles as his past literally comes back to haunt him. Terrified and broken, he confesses everything to the innkeeper the next morning, begging for forgiveness and expecting to be turned over to the authorities. Instead, the innkeeper makes his own shocking revelation. He too is a murderer, having killed his wife for her inheritance money and used it to build the inn. As punishment for his crime, his daughter was born a Rokurokubi, doomed to live with the curse of his sins. Another classic tale focuses on the theme of hidden sins and their discovery. A wealthy lord notices that the oil in his household lamps is mysteriously disappearing each night. Suspecting theft among his servants, he decides to investigate personally. Hiding in the shadows, he watches as one of his servant girls sleeps peacefully in her quarters, until her neck begins its impossible extension. The Lord watches in fascination and horror as the girl's head glides across the room like a serpent, her tongue emerging to lap delicately at the oil in a nearby lantern. The sight is both beautiful and monstrous, an elegant display of supernatural ability that nevertheless represents something fundamentally wrong with the natural order. The next morning, without explanation, the Lord dismisses the girl from his service. She's left bewildered and heartbroken, unable to understand why she keeps losing positions, why her life seems cursed with inexplicable bad luck. She never learns the truth about her nocturnal activities, remaining forever trapped between two worlds: the human life she believes she lives, and the supernatural existence that operates beyond her consciousness. These stories weren't merely entertainment. They were sophisticated moral instruction wrapped in supernatural packaging. They taught audiences about the consequences of greed, the inevitability of karmic justice, and the way sin could poison not just the perpetrator, but entire families and communities. The Rokurokubi became a symbol of how moral transgression could literally transform a person, making the internal corruption visible in the most horrifying way possible. The transformation of the Rokurokubi from terrifying folklore creature to beloved pop culture icon represents one of the most fascinating examples of how modern media can completely recontextualize traditional mythology. This evolution didn't happen overnight, but rather through a gradual process of reinterpretation that began in the 20th century and continues today. The crucial turning point came with the work of Shigeru Mizuki, the legendary manga artist who single-handedly brought yokai into mainstream Japanese popular culture through his series Gugugu no Kitaro. Mizuki's revolutionary approach treated yokai not as simple monsters to be feared, but as complex characters with their own motivations, struggles, and even sympathetic qualities. His influence on subsequent generations of creators cannot be overstated. He essentially created the template for how modern Japanese media would approach traditional supernatural beings. Following Mizuki's lead, the Rokurokubi began appearing in various forms of media throughout the latter half of the 20th century. The 1968 horror film trilogy Yokai Monsters gave audiences their first major cinematic encounter with the creature, presenting her in vivid, terrifying detail that captured both the horror and the tragic beauty of the original folklore. But the real transformation began as modern storytelling became increasingly interested in exploring the psychological and emotional depths of traditionally monstrous characters. The inherently tragic nature of the Rokurokubi, often an innocent woman cursed for sins not her own, made her an ideal candidate for this more sympathetic treatment. This shift reached a beautiful culmination in the 2015 animated film Miss Hokusai, which featured a Rokurokubi woman whose family had learned to live with her condition. Rather than treating her transformation as something horrifying to be hidden, they managed it with gentle care, hanging mosquito nets around her sleeping area to prevent her wandering head from disturbing the household. This portrayal was revolutionary in its compassion, presenting the Rokurokubi not as a monster, but as a person dealing with a challenging medical condition. The explosion of anime and manga in the late 20th and early 21st centuries provided the perfect medium for further reimagining the Rokurokubi. Her distinctive visual characteristic, the impossibly long neck, translated beautifully into the exaggerated fantastical world of Japanese animation and comics. More importantly, her dual nature resonated perfectly with anime's frequent themes of characters struggling to fit into society despite being fundamentally different. The manga series Kanojo wa Rokurokubi, She is a Rokurokubi, exemplifies this new approach perfectly. Rather than a horror story, it's a gentle romantic comedy about a high school girl whose Rokurokubi nature creates amusing situations and social awkwardness rather than terror. Her stretching neck becomes less a supernatural curse and more an endearing character quirk, like being unusually tall or having an odd laugh. In the incredibly popular Toho Project video game series, the Rokurokubi character Sekabanki serves as a schoolteacher, her supernatural nature completely integrated into the game's world where humans and yokai coexist peacefully. The Rosario plus Vampire anime and manga series features a Rokurokubi as one of many monster students attending Yokai Academy, where supernatural beings learn to integrate with human society. This modern interpretation often completely abandons the original folklore's emphasis on sin and punishment, instead focusing on themes of acceptance, belonging, and the challenges of being different in a conformist society. The Rokurokubi becomes a metaphor for anyone who feels like they don't quite fit in, the awkward teenager, the immigrant struggling with cultural differences, or anyone whose true nature differs from what others expect. Video games have embraced the Rokurokubi with particular enthusiasm, finding creative ways to incorporate her neck-stretching abilities into gameplay mechanics. Fighting games use her extended reach for unique attack patterns. Puzzle games employ her ability to access distant objects, and role-playing games often cast her as a character whose unusual perspective, literally being able to see around corners, provides unique solutions to problems. The visual design of modern Rokurokubi has also evolved significantly, where traditional depictions emphasize the horror of the transformation. Pale, ghostly heads floating on serpentine necks, contemporary versions often make her beautiful and appealing. Her neck might glow with soft light, move with graceful fluidity, or even have decorative patterns that emphasize its supernatural nature as something wonderful rather than terrifying. Perhaps most significantly, modern Rokurokubi characters often have agency over their transformation. Rather than being helpless victims of a curse that operates outside their consciousness, they might be able to control their ability, using it strategically or even playfully. This change represents a fundamental shift from viewing the Rokurokubi as a victim of supernatural forces to seeing her as someone empowered by unique abilities. The remarkable journey of the Rokurokubi from Edo period cautionary tale to modern pop culture icon reveals profound truths about how cultures evolve and reinterpret their own mythological heritage. What began as a creature born from fear, a physical manifestation of moral anxiety and social control, has been transformed into a symbol of acceptance, diversity, and the beauty found in difference. This transformation reflects broader changes in Japanese society and global culture. Where the original folklore emphasized conformity, punishment for transgression, and the terrifying consequences of moral failure, modern interpretations celebrate individuality, empathy for the marginalized, and the idea that being different doesn't make someone monstrous. The enduring appeal of the Rokurokubi lies not just in her striking visual imagery. That impossibly long neck remains one of the most memorable images in all of folklore, but in her fundamental duality. She exists between worlds, between human and supernatural, between day and night, between consciousness and dreams. In our modern era of complex identities and shifting boundaries, this liminality feels more relatable than ever. Her story also demonstrates our species' remarkable capacity for recontextualizing fear into fascination, horror into humor, and monsters into beloved characters. The same culture that once used the Rokurokubi to teach moral lessons through terror now uses her to explore themes of acceptance and belonging. This evolution shows not just changing artistic trends, but fundamental shifts in how we understand otherness and difference. As we continue into the 21st century, the Rokurokubi will undoubtedly continue evolving, finding new expressions in virtual reality, interactive media, and forms of storytelling we haven't yet imagined. But whether she appears as a terrifying specter from the past or a charming character in tomorrow's anime, she will always carry within her the essential human truth that our monsters often reveal more about us than our heroes do. The next time you encounter a Rokurokubi in modern media, stretching her neck to reach a high shelf in a comedy anime, or serving as a misunderstood character learning to fit in, remember the centuries of cultural evolution she represents. In her transformation from nightmare to friend, we can see reflected our own journey toward a more compassionate understanding of what it means to be different, and perhaps what it means to be human. What's your favorite depiction of a Rokurokubi or any other yokai in modern media? How do you think these reinterpretations change our relationship with traditional folklore? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe for more deep dives into the fascinating world where ancient mythology meets modern culture.